You're standing in darkness. Poenari Castle, Romania, 2014. The restoration crew called you 3 days ago. Emergency. They found something during foundation work. Something behind a false wall that shouldn't exist. You're a forensic archaeologist. You've examined medieval dungeons across Europe. Torture chambers, mass graves, execution sites. But when your flashlight hits the wall of this hidden cell, you stop breathing. Scratches, hundreds of them, covering every surface from floor to ceiling. Not random, organized, deliberate. You step closer. The limestone is cold, damp, untouched for 5 centuries. And then you see the pattern. 3 vertical lines carved deep into the stone, over and over, clustered in groups. You start counting. Your hands are shaking. 47 groups in the first square meter. You measure the wall, calculate. 847 sets of 3 lines cover this cell. That's 2,541 days. Someone was kept here for 7 years, and they counted every single day by carving it into stone with their fingernails. But that's not what made the restoration team seal the room and call you. It's what's carved above the counting marks. Names, 17 names, scratched in different hands, different depths, different levels of desperation. And below each name, a single word repeated over and over until the letters blur together. Watching. He is watching. Always watching. Watching us die. You run your fingers over the deepest carving. The letters are crude, rushed. The final stroke trails off like the hand that made it simply stopped. Forensic analysis will later confirm what you already suspect. These weren't carved with tools. They were carved with fingernails, with bone fragments, with whatever these people could use before their bodies gave out. The cell is 6 feet by 8 feet. The ceiling is 5 feet high. You can't stand upright, can't lie down comfortably, can't escape the walls that press in from every side. There's a drain in the corner. Chemical analysis will show it's caked with human waste, blood, material consistent with prolonged confinement. And then you notice something that makes your blood go cold. The scratches aren't just on the walls. They're on the ceiling, on the floor, on the door that was sealed from the outside. Someone tried to claw their way out of every surface. Spent years scraping at stone with bare hands until bone showed through. But here's what breaks you. The counting marks stop at 2,541. But the word watching continues for another 3 feet of wall space, which means whoever carved this lived long enough to count 7 years, and then lived longer, without the strength to count. Just enough strength to scratch one word: watching. This cell is in Poenari Castle, Vlad Dracula's fortress, built on a mountain, accessible only by climbing 1,480 steps. No one climbs those steps by accident.
No one finds this castle unless they're brought here. And no one leaves this cell unless Vlad decides they've served their purpose. The forensic team will spend 3 months analyzing this room. DNA extraction, chemical residue, tool mark analysis, carbon dating. And what they discover will change everything historians thought they knew about Vlad the Impaler. Because this cell, it wasn't for enemies, it wasn't for criminals, it wasn't for prisoners of war. It was for family, for nobles, for people Vlad trusted. Until he didn't. The DNA analysis will prove it. The names carved into these walls match genealogical records of Wallachian noble families. people who should have been protected by rank and blood. But Vlad didn't just kill them. He made them carve their own memorials, made them count their own days, made them write his favorite word over and over until their minds broke. Watching. Before we examine what these carvings reveal, before we reconstruct who these people were and why they died here, I need you to do something. Subscribe to this channel right now. Hit that notification bell. Because what you're about to learn, most documentaries won't touch. This is peer-reviewed archaeological evidence. This is forensic analysis. This is documented history. But it's too dark, too disturbing, too real for mainstream platforms. The full forensic report from this cell, restricted. The DNA analysis, classified by the Romanian Ministry of Culture. The photographs, locked in university archives. They don't want you to know what was carved into these walls, what it reveals about Vlad, what it teaches us about power and terror and the architecture of suffering. So if you want the truth, if you want to see what 17 people carved into limestone while they were dying, you need to force YouTube to show you this content. Comment one word right now: carved. Tell me you're ready. Tell me you can handle what forensic evidence reveals about medieval terror. Because we're about to examine this cell the way a crime scene investigator examines a murder room. Every scratch, every name, every day counted. Every word repeated until the hand that wrote it could no longer move. And what we discover will answer the question nobody asks. Not how many people Vlad killed, but why he needed them to carve their own deaths into stone. Why he needed them to count. Why he needed them to write watching until they couldn't write anymore. This is forensic history. This is the cell they found in Vlad's castle. And this is what prisoners carved into the walls while he watched them die. The first name carved into the cell wall is Bogdan. Below it, in the same hand, a single line: brother of the prince, loyal until questioned. Forensic analysis dates this carving to approximately 1460, 2 years into Vlad's second reign. Bogdan wasn't a stranger. He was a boyar, a noble, part of Vlad's inner circle, the kind of man who dined at the prince's table, who commanded troops,
who held land and title. Until one day, he didn't. The historical record shows that in 1460, Vlad executed several boyars accused of plotting against him. The chronicles mention public impalements, spectacles designed to send messages. But Bogdan's name doesn't appear in those chronicles. He wasn't impaled publicly. He wasn't displayed as a warning. He was brought here, to this cell, where no one could see him, where no one could hear him, and he was left to carve his own story into stone. The second name is Alexandru. Below it, I told them nothing. He knows I told them nothing. He watches anyway. The third name is Mircea. Below it, forgive me, Father. I do not know what I did. The fourth name is harder to read. The letters are shallow, uncertain, as if the hand that carved them was already failing. Stefan. Below it, barely legible, how many days is forever? 17 names, 17 people who were once trusted, once powerful, once certain they understood how the world worked. And then Vlad put them in this cell, not for days, not for weeks, for years. The forensic analysis reveals something that historians had missed, something that changes how we understand Vlad's methods. These people didn't die quickly. The chemical analysis of the cell shows prolonged habitation, biological residue consistent with years of confinement, evidence of food provision, water, medical care. Vlad kept them alive, deliberately, systematically, for as long as possible. Why? Because Vlad understood something about power that most rulers miss. Public executions send one message: disobey and you die. But this cell sent a different message. Disobey and you disappear, into a place where no one can find you, where no one can hear you, where you have nothing but stone walls and time to think about what you did wrong. And the worst part? You don't even know what you did wrong. Look at the carvings again. Read what these men wrote. I told them nothing. I do not know what I did. Loyal until questioned. They're not confessing. They're protesting. They're insisting they're innocent. Which means Vlad put them here without telling them why. Without charges. Without trial. Without explanation. Just silence. And watching. This is psychological warfare perfected. This is terror refined into science. You can't defend yourself if you don't know what you're accused of. You can't plan escape if you don't know who betrayed you. You can't even die with dignity if you don't understand why you're dying. All you can do is carve your name into stone, count the days, and write watching until your fingernails break. Now, here's where it gets worse. The DNA analysis revealed something unexpected. 3 of the 17 names showed genetic markers consistent with Vlad's own family line. Not immediate family, but cousins, extended relatives, people connected by blood and obligation. Vlad put his own family in this cell. Let them carve their names. Let them count their days.
Let them die slowly while he watched. Why would he do that? Because Vlad learned something as a child, something that shaped every decision he made as a ruler. Fear only works if it's unpredictable. If everyone knows the rules, they can calculate risk, they can plan around consequences, they can game the system. But if the rules are unknowable, if even family isn't safe, if loyalty doesn't guarantee survival, then no one can ever be certain, no one can ever plan, no one can ever feel safe. And that uncertainty, that's the most powerful weapon a ruler can have. But to understand why Vlad understood this so clearly, we have to go back to another cell in another country, where an 11-year-old boy learned what it meant to be watched. Constantinople, 1442, the Ottoman court. Vlad is 11 years old. His younger brother, Radu, is 7. They've been given to the Sultan as hostages, insurance, to guarantee their father's loyalty to the Ottoman Empire. They're not prisoners exactly. They're guests, honored guests, given quarters in the palace, taught languages, trained in combat, educated in statecraft. But they're not free. They can't leave, can't contact their family without supervision, can't speak without knowing someone is listening. They are, in every meaningful sense, in a cell. A gilded cell, but a cell nonetheless. And every day, they watch. They watch the Sultan hold court, watch how he rewards loyalty and punishes betrayal. Watch how he makes examples of those who displease him. But most importantly, they watch how he makes people uncertain. The Ottoman court in the 1440s was a machine of controlled terror. Executions were rare. Torture was even rarer. What the Ottomans perfected was something subtler, something more effective. Surveillance, suspicion, the constant knowledge that you were being watched, that your words were being reported, that your loyalty was being tested. Guards who seemed friendly but took notes, tutors who asked casual questions that weren't casual at all, friends who disappeared overnight without explanation. Young Vlad learned to read the patterns, learned to see how power works when it doesn't announce itself. He watched men summoned to the Sultan's presence. Sometimes they returned, sometimes they didn't, and no one ever explained the difference. He watched how the mere possibility of punishment could control thousands of people more effectively than actual violence ever could. He watched how uncertainty eats at the human mind, how not knowing is worse than knowing, how the fear of what might happen is more powerful than what actually happens. And he learned. But here's what makes Vlad different from his brother Radu. Radu adapted, converted to Islam, became a favorite of the Sultan, learned to love his captors, or at least learned to perform love convincingly enough to survive with dignity intact. Vlad refused, remained Christian, remained visibly Wallachian, remained defiant, and he was punished for it. Not publicly, not dramatically, but consistently, quietly, in ways that left no marks. Historical sources suggest Vlad spent time in actual confinement during his hostage years. Not the palace quarters, real cells, real isolation, real darkness. We don't know exactly how long. We don't know exactly what happened in those cells. But we know what Vlad did later, what he built, what he perfected. And it looks exactly like what he experienced. A cell where you count days, where you carve messages no one will read, where you write watching, because that's the only thing you're certain of. The Ottomans taught Vlad a lesson, not the lesson they intended, but the one he learned anyway. That power isn't about public displays, it's about private terror, about making people police themselves because they never know who's watching. When Vlad returned to Wallachia at 17, he brought that lesson home, and he spent the next decade perfecting it. The cell in Poenari Castle, that's not an innovation, that's a replication. That's Vlad building what was built around him. The 17 names carved into stone, those aren't random victims, they're test subjects, they're demonstrations, they're Vlad's way of proving he learned the lesson. But there's a twist, a psychological twist that forensic analysis revealed. The cell in Poenari has one feature the Ottoman cells didn't have, a small window, 8 inches square, set 7 feet high in the wall, too high to reach, too small to escape through, but large enough to let in light, to let in sound, to let prisoners know the world still exists outside their cell. Why would Vlad include a window? Because he understood something even the Ottomans missed. Complete isolation breaks people too quickly. Total darkness makes them go mad, and madness isn't useful. What Vlad wanted wasn't broken minds. He wanted conscious suffering. He wanted people aware of every moment, counting every day, knowing exactly how long they'd been there and how long they might stay. That window wasn't mercy. It was refined cruelty. It was keeping people sane enough to suffer intelligently. And the view from that window? It looks directly at the valley below, at the villages, at the trade routes, at normal life continuing without you. You can see freedom. You can see people living. You just can't reach them. That's the real torture. Not pain, not darkness, but proximity to what you've lost. Vlad learned terror in Ottoman cells, but he perfected it in Wallachian stone. Stop. We need to talk about what happened in 2019. Because everything I've told you so far is documented history, archaeological fact, forensic evidence. But what happened when they brought in a linguistics expert to analyze the full text carved into that cell? That's the part they tried to classify. Dr. Elena Constantinescu, University of Bucharest, specialist in medieval Romanian dialects. She spent 6 months studying the cell, and she found something no one expected. The carvings aren't random. They're not just names and counting marks and desperate prayers. They're a code, a message, written in a cipher that was common among Wallachian nobles in the 15th century. A code designed to be read by other nobles, by people who would understand the references, by people who might someday find this cell. Dr. Constantinescu's translation was published in a limited circulation academic journal, 50 copies. No media coverage, no public announcement. I have a copy, and I'm going to tell you what it says. The decoded message, written by the prisoner named Alexandru, the one who carved "I told them nothing," reads like this. To whoever finds this, know that the prince keeps us not for what we did, but for what we represent. He fears not our actions, but our potential. He watches us not to learn our secrets, but to learn how long loyalty lasts under pressure. We are experiments. We are lessons. We are warnings to those who still live free. Tell them this. The prince trusts no one, not even himself. The cell he built for us exists first in his mind. He carved these walls inside himself long before he carved them into stone. Save yourselves. Trust no one who trusts no one. Let that sink in. These men understood. Even as they were dying, they understood what Vlad was doing, and they understood why. They weren't being punished for betrayal. They were being studied. They were being used to answer a question. How long does loyalty last? Vlad wanted to know, needed to know, because he'd been in cells like this. He'd counted days like they were counting. He'd wondered if anyone would save him. And no one did. So now he was testing. If I put a loyal man in a cell for 7 years, does he stay loyal? If I give him no reason for his confinement, no hope of release, no contact with the outside world, does he curse me? Does he break? Does he die still believing in the system? The 17 names in that cell weren't criminals. They were data points. They were answers to a question Vlad needed answered. Can loyalty survive absolute terror? And the answer, carved into stone by 17 dying men, is no. Every single carved message shows deterioration. The first entries are coherent, defiant. I am loyal. I told them nothing. I did nothing wrong. But as the counting marks increase, the messages change. How many days is forever? Why does he watch? What does he want from me? Please let me die. Please let this end. I don't remember what I did. I don't remember who I was. By the end, most of them aren't even writing words anymore, just scratches, random marks. The motor memory of writing without the cognitive ability to form meaning. Vlad broke them, systematically, scientifically, and he documented the process by letting them document themselves. The cell wasn't a prison, it was a laboratory, and the 17 names were experiments. If you're still watching, you've just learned something that's not in any history book. That's not in any documentary. That's classified in academic archives most people will never access. Subscribe right now, hit that like button, because YouTube is going to bury this video. The algorithm sees forensic evidence of psychological torture and marks it as not advertiser-friendly. But this is history, this is science, this is truth. And if you think people deserve to know what Vlad really was, if you think we need to understand how terror works at this level of sophistication, share this video. Comment "experiment" if you understand what this reveals. Because we're not done. The cell has one more secret, one more message, one more carved truth that changes everything. There's one more carving in the cell, found in 2016 during a second survey, behind a loose stone, hidden deliberately. It's not a name, it's not a count, it's not a prayer. It's a confession, written by someone who wasn't a prisoner. It reads, "I am the guard. I bring them food. I bring them water. I watch them carve. I tell the prince what they write. I am commanded to tell no one they are here. I am commanded to tell no one when they die. I am commanded to watch and record and report. I do not know their crimes. I do not know their names until I read them on the wall. I fear that one day I will be ordered inside, and someone else will bring me food, and I will carve my name next to theirs, and someone will watch me die as I watch them." The guard was as much a prisoner as the men in the cell. He feared the same fate. He understood the system. He knew that today's watcher could be tomorrow's watched. And that's the genius of Vlad's terror. That's the mechanism that made it sustainable. He didn't just terrorize his enemies. He terrorized everyone. His guards, his nobles, his allies, even his family. No one was safe. No one could be certain. And everyone became complicit because everyone feared being next. The cell in Poenari Castle wasn't an outlier. It was the foundation. It was the architectural expression of Vlad's entire philosophy of power. Trust no one. Watch everyone. Make certain that anyone who serves you understands they could just as easily be in the cell as guarding it. This is how terror becomes systematic, how it scales, how it persists even when the tyrant isn't watching personally. You don't need Vlad in every room if every guard thinks like Vlad, if every guard fears becoming the prisoner, if every guard knows that mercy could be interpreted as conspiracy. The system perpetuates itself. The cell reproduces itself. Fear becomes the architecture of governance. Now here's where this connects to everything Vlad did publicly. The impalements, the night raids, the scorched earth tactics, the forest of 20,000 bodies. Those weren't separate policies. They were extensions of the same logic that created this cell. Make suffering visible. Make it unpredictable. Make it systematic. Make everyone complicit. And make certain no one ever feels safe.
The public impalements were for external enemies, for Ottoman armies, for foreign merchants. But the cell? The cell was for internal control, for nobles, for family, for the people closest to power. Vlad needed both, the spectacle and the silence, the visible terror and the invisible terror. One kept external threats at bay, the other kept internal threats uncertain. And the combination made Vlad nearly unstoppable for 6 years. Nearly. Because there's a cost to this kind of power, a cost that Vlad either didn't see or didn't care about. When you terrorize everyone, you destroy the social bonds that make governance possible. You eliminate loyalty because you've eliminated trust. You create a state where everyone is constantly calculating how to survive the next day. And eventually, your enemies don't have to defeat you. They just have to wait until your own system collapses from internal exhaustion. That's what happened to Vlad. In 1462, after 6 years of terror, his allies abandoned him. His nobles fled to Hungary. His guards stopped reporting. His enemies coordinated. And Vlad found himself in a Hungarian prison, not a cell like the one he built, but a prison nonetheless. The man who terrorized others through isolation experienced isolation himself. The man who watched others carve their days into stone spent years wondering if anyone would save him. No one did, not immediately, because terror destroys reciprocity. You can't call on loyalty you've spent years proving doesn't exist. When Vlad was finally released in 1476, he tried to reclaim power, tried to rebuild the system, tried to restart the terror. But his second reign lasted months, not years, because the people who once feared him had learned the lesson he taught them, that power built on fear is temporary, that cells can be escaped, that watchers can be overthrown. Vlad died in battle, or assassination. The sources disagree, but they agree on this. His head was cut off and sent to the Ottoman Sultan as proof of death, displayed as a trophy, preserved as a warning. The man who turned human bodies into messages became a message himself. And the cell in Poenari Castle? It remained sealed, hidden, forgotten, until 2014, when restoration workers found it, and 17 names, and one truth carved into stone by dying men, that terror works until it doesn't, and when it stops working, it destroys everything it built.
Let's return to the forensic evidence, because there's more in that cell than names and messages. There's data, biological data, chemical data, data about how human beings respond to prolonged, isolated confinement. The cell's dimensions create specific physiological effects. 6 by 8 feet, 5-foot ceiling. You can't stand, can't stretch, can't exercise. After weeks, muscle atrophy begins. After months, bone density decreases. After years, permanent skeletal damage. The drainage system shows evidence of repeated gastrointestinal distress. The kind caused by stress, by malnutrition, by contaminated water deliberately provided. The chemical analysis of the walls shows elevated levels of cortisol, a stress hormone, secreted through skin, absorbed into limestone over years of contact. The 17 prisoners weren't just psychologically tortured, they were physiologically breaking down. In measurable ways, in ways that leave traces 5 centuries later. This is what makes the cell so forensically valuable. It's a time capsule of suffering, a preserved record of what systematic terror does to the human body. Modern studies of solitary confinement show similar patterns. Prisoners in isolation for years develop permanent cognitive damage, memory loss, hallucinations, inability to process complex thoughts. The carved messages in Vlad's cell show exactly that progression. The early carvings are coherent, grammatically correct, organized. The later carvings become fragmented, repetitive, nonsensical. The word watching appears 847 times in various forms throughout the cell. Sometimes as a sentence, sometimes as a single word repeated until it becomes just scratches that vaguely resemble letters. This is what trauma does. It reduces complex thought to simple loops. It traps the mind in the moment of greatest fear and replays it endlessly. Vlad didn't just imprison these men. He created conditions that would maximally damage human cognition while keeping the body alive. He engineered psychological destruction with the same precision he engineered military tactics. And the evidence suggests this wasn't accidental. The cell's design shows intentionality. The window positioned just high enough. The dimensions just restrictive enough. The drainage system that requires prisoners to live with their own waste but doesn't cause fatal disease. Every detail was calculated to maximize duration of conscious suffering. This is what historians mean when they call Vlad sophisticated. Not sophisticated morally, sophisticated technically. He understood human psychology before the field existed. He understood trauma responses before they were documented. He understood how to use architecture as a weapon before anyone wrote theories about it. The cell in Poenari Castle is evidence of that sophistication. It's a monument to calculated cruelty. But it's also evidence of something else, something the forensic analysis revealed that historians are still debating. The cell shows signs of modification, multiple construction phases, different stone-cutting techniques, different tool marks. Which means Vlad didn't build this cell once. He refined it, updated it, improved it based on what he learned from earlier prisoners. He was iterating, experimenting, optimizing his system of terror. The cell we found in 2014, that's version 3 or 4. Earlier versions existed, were tested, were found insufficient. Vlad kept building better cells, more effective cells, more psychologically destructive cells, until he perfected it. That's not madness. That's method. That's science applied to suffering. And it worked. For 6 years, Vlad maintained power through this system, kept external enemies at bay, kept internal rivals terrified. Until the system collapsed, until the cost exceeded the benefit, until fear destroyed the social bonds that made coordination possible. The cell's final lesson isn't about Vlad. It's about terror itself. Terror scales. Terror can be engineered. Terror can be effective. But terror also has a half-life. It decays, it corrodes, and eventually it destroys the institutions it was meant to protect. The cell in Poenari Castle is sealed again now, restricted access, catalogued but not displayed. The Romanian government decided it's too disturbing for public exhibition, too graphic, too real. The 17 names are documented in academic records. The forensic analysis is published in specialized journals. The DNA results are classified. We've buried the evidence, not because it's false, because it's uncomfortable, because this cell forces questions we'd rather not answer. If terror works, why shouldn't states use it? If Vlad stopped the Ottoman Empire with these methods, were they justified? If 17 people had to die in a cell so thousands could live free, was that an acceptable trade? The answer can't be simple morality, because history shows us that moral arguments don't stop powerful people from doing effective things. The answer has to be practical, based on evidence, and the evidence this cell provides is clear. Terror works in the short term. It can stop invasions, create compliance, maintain order. But it destroys long-term resilience. It makes societies brittle. It turns potential allies into enemies. It makes succession impossible. Vlad's Wallachia didn't survive him. It fragmented immediately, became a battleground for foreign powers, lost the independence he fought for. The methods that saved the state also prevented it from building the institutions that could outlast him. That's the verdict carved into these walls. You can rule by fear, but you can't build by fear. And anything built on fear collapses the moment the fear stops. The 17 names in that cell aren't just victims. They're evidence. Evidence of a system that worked tactically but failed strategically. Evidence that terror, even sophisticated terror, even scientifically engineered terror, eventually eats itself. 6 centuries later, we're still finding cells, still analyzing carved walls, still trying to understand how someone could systematize cruelty with this level of precision. Not because we're curious, because we're still doing it. Different tools, same logic. Surveillance instead of cells. Economic coercion instead of physical confinement. But the mathematics are identical. Trade freedom for security. Trade trust for control. Trade legitimacy for compliance. And call it necessary. Call it effective. Call it the price of stability. Vlad called it that too. And his head ended up in a sultan's palace, preserved in honey, displayed as proof that terror has a shelf life. The cell they found in Poenari Castle isn't just medieval history. It's a blueprint, a warning, a testament to what happens when power stops asking for consent and starts demanding submission. The 17 names carved into those walls had families, had lives, had futures that Vlad erased. But they left one thing he couldn't erase, one message that survived 5 centuries of deliberate forgetting. Watching. He was always watching, and that watching, that surveillance, that constant uncertainty, that's what killed them. Not the cell, not the isolation, not even the years. The knowledge that they were being watched, studied, used, that their suffering had a purpose they couldn't understand, that they would die without knowing why. That's the real terror. Not pain, not death, but meaningless suffering under constant observation. And that's what Vlad perfected, what he learned in Ottoman cells, what he built in Wallachian stone. A system where watching becomes the weapon, where visibility becomes the torture, where knowledge that someone is always observing destroys the ability to resist. If you made it this far, you've walked through 5 centuries of forensic evidence. You've read the names of 17 people who carved their deaths into limestone. Here's what I need you to do. Subscribe to this channel. Turn on notifications, because this kind of content gets suppressed. Forensic analysis of historical atrocities. Evidence-based examination of how terror works. YouTube doesn't promote it organically. You have to force it. Like this video, not because you enjoyed it, because you think the 17 names deserve to be remembered. Share it. Send it to someone who thinks history is simple, who believes the past is just good guys and bad guys. And comment, one word, remembered. Tell me these 17 people won't be forgotten. Tell me their carved messages matter. Next video, we're examining another cell, another set of carvings, another piece of physical evidence that changes how we understand medieval terror. The oubliette beneath Château de Pierrefonds, where prisoners were dropped through a hole in the ceiling and left in total darkness for years. And where restoration workers in 2022 found something carved into the floor, in the dark, by people who couldn't see what they were writing. Until then, remember what forensics teaches us. Stone doesn't lie. Bones don't lie. DNA doesn't lie. The 17 names carved into Vlad's cell wall are proof. Proof of systematic terror. Proof of sophisticated cruelty. Proof that evil can be engineered. And proof that 5 centuries later, someone still remembers.